Hi, I'm Seamless, and today is Friday, which means it's time for a new How to Bass tutorial. And today, I'm going to show you how to make this sound. We're going to work backwards on this one because the starting position doesn't really make a lot of sense. As opposed to a thing that we would want to do on purpose from scratch, because it really doesn't. This sound is a confluence of a whole bunch of stuff, a whole bunch of really simple stuff that I've just never done before because I thought it was too simple, but it turned out to be really good ideas. So, in the end, there is this compressor. So, like, the way that it's Maximus is interesting because there's like 100 different ways you could approach doing the same thing, just because of the lack of the concept of a threshold or a ratio, like from a traditional compressor. I'm using it like a little bit more traditionally in this instance, because you can see like what I've done here is I set a threshold and then I set a ratio. This is what this is, and then I use the post to sort of bring back the gain, because we are kind of bringing down the gain when we do this kind of thing. When we get something like this, that it has its value for this, because this being sort of like the end of it all. It's not. It's a little bit more mixing related than it is sound design related. Although there is a lot of things happening here that are contributing to the sound design. One of the things being that like a lot of these, except for the bass, have extremely fast time variables and like no attack and that kind of thing, which is gonna inspire distortion. And I'm also using curve number 1 as opposed to 3, which is the default, or 8, which is the end. I'm trying to tell what is happening so fast. Let's see. It looks like that versus the opposite of that. It's sharper is what I'm saying about that. And so we're, like I said before, about what separates compression from distortion is just that if you compress something faster than the oscillation of its waveform, then you're going to get wave shaping. So there's that. I'm also sort of stereoizing it and removing the low end, because there was a lot of low end stereo on this, which I didn't necessarily expect. Although I didn't try super hard to like save the sub on this. And that's because for bases like these, I assume that whatever anyone is ever going to use it, they are going to replace the sub with a sub. Because you should do that. That's kind of a song-based thing, not a sound-by-sound based thing. Although you could do a sound-by-sound based thing. Kind of up to you. And I had this convolver, which is a short sound. I got it out of the short sound, the small rooms thing. Which one is this? Cargo van interior here? Good times. It's stretched to be even smaller. So that's a lot of fun. Super Stereo does a lot of that, and it's only like kind of on these high mids here, which is where those like sort of talky harmonics live. Those kind of things. That's just there to get more room as well. Super subtle. This guy exists solely to get rid of the higher harmonics, because the highest frequencies, because boy are there a lot. Even having done this, there are still just so many. It's actually started because this was born of a bass I was doing with a lesson earlier, which doesn't look anything like that sound anymore. But one of the qualities that they were trying to go after was sort of that guitar-ish sounding sound. And one of the qualities of a guitar sound has more to do with what's happening in the guitar cabinet than it does the actual guitar distortion. Because the distortion is similar enough to this distortion you're used to using, but several sort of subtle differences. But the end result is largely what the cabinet is doing, the speaker cabinet. Because the speaker cabinet is not full frequency; they're like deliberately not as good as like PA speakers to give us that color. And a big part of it is just removing a lot of the high end. So if you didn't want to have a guitar rig, you didn't want to use a cabinet, you can approximate it pretty well by just removing it most of first up to 10K kind of thing. That's kind of what's up with that. This didn't really remove it. This just kind of attenuated it because there's just so much of it. But you could, put it down harder than what I'm doing to make it a bit more legit. Because this no longer has that sort of guitar type sound, but it's just there because it's just so sharp. I mentioned the guitar type distortion. If you ever saw that FL Guru video on the Wave Shaper, Scott demonstrated a type of distortion called crossover distortion, where the crossover, if you look at if you look at a wave shaper, the typical expression of it is in this symmetrical mode where it applies the same distortion to the positive and a negative oscillation. And this is what it looks like in asymmetrical mode, but you can see it's sort of the same on both sides. But you can see it like on the crossover, the crossing of 0 dB, of 0 amplitude, the 0 crossing. There's a little bump right there, and then just, the rest of the distortion. This is a very particular kind of distortion that was apparently indicative of guitar distortion. So that's one of those subtle differences I was talking about. Let's not have you in asymmetrical mode. And then this, I'm actually boosting the crap out of the sub so that it has that rounder sound to it. That's the point. That's the purpose of that. So now let's get rid of all of this and talk about the weird source. So much of what the sound is being determined by the wave shaper. And that EQ before the distortion. EQ before the distortion, guys. Yeah. So, a lot of the simple, stupid things that I tried were inside Citrus. The first thing that was simple that you would just think like, well, is that I'm using Unison. I don't typically use a lot of Unison when I'm doing FM stuff. And that's just because historically it hasn't sounded all that great to me. But for some reason, it was starting to work out more recently. So I've been experimenting with that. This is a pretty low pitch unison, so it's like low pitch, low phase. So it doesn't really, wow. It takes it a second to really kind of go in there, which is the point. Because I still want it to sound solid, but I want there to be a little bit of sort of modulation. And sort of the value of this is that I can either play two notes like this, and they'll be the same, or I can hold it over, and then that motion will kind of apply itself to it. So you can kind of utilize that in your voicing when you're messing with the MIDI. This is what it sounds like without the unison. Big difference. So the other sort of simple thing is utilizing really high-pitched sort of doings. And not just high-pitched, but also sort of off-pitch. They're still even numbered, and so they're still whole numbers, but they're not octaves. So for example, I'm using 18 right now. I actually originally started off using 10. Here's an octave. That's where I am. Here. That's just showing that you can really, you have a big control over the main kind of texture of it with the pitch of this primary oscillator. And this shape is really just a pretty sure it's a triangle wave, and then some tension and skew to make it look like that. Like just moving around. It's not really that deep. It's being modulated by this really high-pitched dude, but this high-pitched dude isn't really contributing as much as you might think. It's giving it a piece of it, but it's still just a little odd. But what's going on? I'm using the half and the even mode here. I'm having a couple extra additional harmonics from what appears to be just a sine wave. Yeah, not that deep. But it does create an interesting shape and high enough pitch that it doesn't really matter that much. It matters a little bit, but not that much. And such. And now we get into sort of the control level. So this is being modulated. Number 2 is being modulated by number 3. So I'm actually having the mod X, which is the main automation here, come off of it near the top. So it's actually the 2 by itself when it's up there, as opposed to 3 on the whole time. So part of that motion is coming from the modulation of 3 being on and off, which is kind of neat. 3 doing anything? I think I'm messing with pitch now. Phase now. I was doing some more complicated things, but they got kind of out of hand. And number 1 here, I have a saw wave, which is another simple application of something. Typically, I just use sine waves as outputs, which is fine enough if you want to do that kind of thing. And also, if you're looking for that squarish sound, you would want to use a sine wave or a square wave or a triangle wave. Really, anything but a saw wave. But utilizing a saw wave, because here's the thing, is that like when I have the mod, pretty low, because this is really high pitch. And here's actually, this is a fun fact about FM. If you think about how FM works, it's not really modulating pitch. It's modulating phase in the digital world. And it modulates phase. And when you change the phase of something while you're playing it, this alters the shape of the size of the period, which is the pitch. So it's basically the Doppler effect. But it's not about the position of the phase. It's about how fast the phase is changing. So the faster the phase change, the higher the pitch, which means the higher the pitch, the more intense the FM. So if you have the same profile of like a sound and you make it 1 octave higher, it's going to be more intense than it was initially. So what this means is when I have a really high pitched sound, the FM is extremely intense. And so on the mod for number 1 here, I just brought it down really, really, really low. You might be thinking, well, why didn't I just bring it low like I did number 3 here? And that's because with 2 this high, it also affects how hard 3 is coming in. So if I could bring it down, but it would also bring down how hard 3 is, and then one of them had to be high. Why not number 2? And as well, in the mod you can see here, I'm controlling not all that much FM is actually being done. It's also not going perfectly to 0 at the bottom here. It just didn't sound all that good at 0. Personally to me. And then the volume is cutting off. This is a control to make it sort of have a sharper feel, because the way that the distortion, like I'm using the compression and all that, just means that like it's pretty much always on and the modulation isn't always apparent. But the really cool thing about this, about using a saw wave, is that the way that the FM is working is that when the modulation is all the way up, it's fully what the FM is. But then when it's all the way down, or close enough to being all the way down, it's more or less like the original saw wave. So we're sort of crossfading between this modulated sound and a saw wave, which gives us that toothy feel, which comes out way more, with all the effects on. And other such fun. Anyway, that's what's up with the sound. So yeah, I'll put up this FLP for download so you can screw around with it. If you have any questions about this, please let me know. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and all that good stuff. And as usual, have a nice day. Hit the button. Hit the button.